It's hard to pinpoint the exact moment things started feeling off with Kira. Maybe it was a gradual shift that crept in too quietly to notice at first, or maybe I was too wrapped up in my own routines to see it. But then, suddenly, it was right there in my face, like a crack running through a glass window that you can't stop staring at. Kira started staying late at work more than usual. And I'm not just talking once in a while. It was all the time. A project deadline, she'd say, with that rushed tone, already grabbing her purse and heading out the door before I could ask any questions. Then there were the work meetings that popped up out of nowhere, always scheduled at weird hours or on weekends. She'd go out with her friends more often, too, always with some excuse about needing a break or needing girl time. At first, I tried to brush it off. Everyone needs space, right? But there was this growing knot in my gut, something telling me that all these new habits weren't just about her being tired or stressed. Our conversations became hollow, like we were just saying words without any real meaning. I'd ask how her day was, and she'd give me some vague answer. Busy, or the usual. No details, no stories, no laughs. I used to know everything about her day, the office gossip, her frustrations, the ridiculous antics of her coworkers. Now, it felt like she was reciting lines, giving me just enough to satisfy my questions, but never enough to actually connect. And when we were together, it was like she wasn't really there. She'd look at her phone a lot, even when we were out for dinner or watching a movie. And when she wasn't on her phone, her eyes were distant, somewhere else entirely. It wasn't until I ran into Trevor that things really started clicking together, though. It was a random Tuesday night, and I'd stopped by the bar for a quick drink after work. Trevor and I go way back, but we hadn't caught up in a while. So when he saw me, he waved me over, and we started chatting, just catching up on life. I mentioned Kira briefly, saying she'd been busy lately, and he gave me this weird look. He hesitated, looked at his drink, then looked back up at me, like he was debating whether to say something. Eventually, he said, "Look, man, I didn't know if I should bring this up, but I saw Kira at a club a few weeks ago." My stomach dropped. Oh yeah, I tried to keep my tone casual, even though I could feel my pulse picking up. He nodded, his face serious. She was with this guy. They seemed close. He had his hand on hers, and honestly, they didn't look like just friends. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to laugh it off, but something about Trevor's expression kept me grounded. He was clearly uncomfortable, like he was sorry to be the one delivering the news. I managed to force a smile, thanked him for letting me know, and told him it was probably nothing, just some co-worker or old friend Kira was catching up with. But as soon as I got home, I couldn't shake the image he'd planted in my mind. Kira was some stranger, her hand in his. I sat in the dark, replaying every interaction I'd had with her over the past few weeks. Suddenly, things started adding up. The late nights, the vague answers, the growing distance. I realized I'd been noticing these signs for a while. I just hadn't wanted to see them. That night was a blur of restless thoughts. I couldn't sleep, couldn't shut my brain off. Every memory of Kira acting strange came rushing back, each one feeding the anger and hurt building inside me. I remembered the nights she came home late, smelling faintly of cologne that wasn't mine. The way she'd brush it off, laugh it away if I asked. "Oh, it's just from the office," she'd say, or "Everyone wears it at work. You know how it is." But I didn't know how it was. Not like this. I found myself going over old photos in my phone, scrolling back to the early days when we were happy, laughing, oblivious to anything that could ever tear us apart. Those memories were like salt on an open wound. Every smile, every hug, every lazy Sunday morning suddenly felt hollow, as if they'd been erased or tainted by whatever was happening now. I could barely look at her anymore without feeling the weight of it pressing down on me. But I couldn't confront her. Not yet. As much as I wanted to grab her and demand the truth, something in me held back. I knew that once I opened that door, there'd be no going back. So I told myself I needed proof, something concrete to bring to her face. And if I was honest, maybe a part of me wasn't ready to accept what I already knew in my gut. That night, lying there in the dark, I started planning. If she was hiding something, I was going to find it. I'd watch her more closely, pay attention to every little thing she said and did. I'd look for patterns, for any clue I'd missed before. And if Trevor had seen her with another man, maybe he could help me figure out more. For now, though, I'd keep quiet. I'd play along, act like nothing was wrong, even if it tore me up inside. The next morning, Kira was already gone before I woke up. Work was supposed to be my escape, my place to get away from all the questions swirling around Kira's behavior. But with Conrad as my boss, escape was a laughable concept. If anything, work had become just another place where I was reminded of how much my life had started to feel like a constant uphill battle. Conrad was the kind of boss who enjoyed tearing people down, but for some reason, he had a particular grudge against me. Every weekly meeting turned into a session where he'd make it his personal mission to humiliate me in front of the team. My ideas were always met with a sneer or some condescending remark, no matter how solid they were. "Randall, you're always doing things halfway," he'd say, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Maybe try thinking things through next time." The worst part was that no one else ever said a word. I'd sit there, face burning, trying to keep it together while everyone else looked down or pretended to shuffle papers. It was isolating being singled out like that. And as if things weren't bad enough at home, work was quickly turning into a battleground. I catch myself wondering if maybe he saw something in me that I didn't. Maybe I really wasn't good enough. Maybe that's why everything was falling apart. But the universe wasn't done kicking me yet. Right as my head was spinning with the mess with Kira, Conrad dropped a new project on my lap. This wasn't just any project, either. It was a big one, the kind that, if done right, could put me up for a promotion. Only, he seemed determined to make sure that wouldn't happen. He kept piling on impossible deadlines, cutting down resources, and then taking shots at my work whenever he could. "If you're going to take this on, Randall, you'll need to up your game. We can't have sloppy work on this one," he'd say with a smirk. Every day felt like a test of endurance. I'd go home exhausted, and Kira would barely glance up from her phone or offer anything more than a perfunctory, "How was work?" It was like screaming into a void with no one around to hear. Between the tension with her and Conrad's constant jabs, it felt like I was being crushed from all sides. There were nights I'd lie in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering if this was it. If this was what my life was supposed to be, a series of humiliations strung together, one right after the other. But not everyone at work was a lost cause. Macy, one of my colleagues, had started noticing the way Conrad treated me. She wasn't loud about it, never made any grand gestures, but she had this quiet way of showing support. It started with small things like saving a seat next to hers in the break room. But soon, we were sharing lunch together regularly. She'd listen to me vent, and there was something about her steady presence that made everything feel a little less suffocating. Macy wasn't just a co-worker. She felt like the only real support I had left. She didn't offer sympathy for sympathy's sake. She was sharp, quick to point out where I might be overthinking things, but she did it in a way that felt reassuring. "Conrad's got it out for you, sure, but it doesn't mean your work's any less valuable," she'd say, cutting through my self-doubt like it was nothing. Macy had a way of reminding me that, maybe, I wasn't as useless as Conrad wanted me to feel. One day during lunch, she looked at me with this sly smile. "You're coming to the corporate party, right?" I shrugged, not really feeling the party spirit. "Maybe, but I don't think I'll bring Kira. Things are complicated right now." She nodded without prying, but there was an understanding in her eyes that felt comforting. That decision to go alone was my first real step away from Kira. It wasn't easy. There was a part of me that still clung to the hope that we could fix things, even though I knew better. But going solo felt like reclaiming something, however small. It was a way to remind myself that I didn't need her validation or approval to show up somewhere. When I finally told Kira about the party, she barely looked up from her phone. "Oh," she said, her tone flat. "Well, have fun." She didn't ask why I wasn't inviting her. She didn't care. That little exchange stuck with me more than I'd like to admit. Arriving at that party alone felt like a strange mix of freedom and anxiety. I've been to plenty of these corporate events with Kira by my side, but walking in solo was a whole different experience. I couldn't shake the weird sensation that everyone's eyes were on me, maybe noticing that she wasn't there, maybe wondering why. As I scanned the room, filled with laughing couples and clinking glasses, I felt a twinge of discomfort. But there was something else, too, a quiet relief. I was finally stepping into something that didn't include her, a small act of reclaiming my own life. The evening went on as these things usually do, filled with awkward small talk and polite laughter that never quite reached anyone's eyes. I kept to myself mostly, nursing a drink and nodding along as colleagues introduced their partners and told the same old stories I'd heard 100 times. For the first time, though, I noticed how scripted it all felt, the way everyone seemed to be performing a version of themselves. And then I saw her, Conrad's wife, Belinda. She was standing off to the side, her gaze fixed on something far off. There was a sadness in her eyes that was hard to miss, a kind of heavy, quiet resignation. She was dressed elegantly, as always, but there was an aloofness about her, like she was physically present, but mentally somewhere else entirely. I don't know what it was, but something pulled me toward her. Maybe I recognized that look in her eyes because I've been seeing it in my own reflection lately. I walked over a little nervous and offered a casual, "Hey, you doing okay?" She turned to me, surprised at first, then softened, as if grateful someone had noticed. "Oh, hey, Randall. Just, these events can be a bit much sometimes." Her voice was calm, but there was a weariness in it that I couldn't ignore. We made small talk for a bit, the usual stuff about work and mutual colleagues. But even as we went through the motions, I could sense an undercurrent of something more, something unsaid. Finally, I decided to push a little to see if she wanted to talk. "You seem, I don't know, distracted," I said, choosing my words carefully. "Everything okay?" There was a pause as she looked down, almost as if weighing whether to let me in on whatever was troubling her. And then, almost in a whisper, she said, "It's Conrad. Let's just say he hasn't been faithful. And it's not exactly a secret." Her words hit me like a punch. Here I was grappling with my suspicions about Kira, and now Belinda was telling me she'd been betrayed too. I saw something familiar in the way her shoulders slumped, in the hurt that lingered just beneath the surface. It was a painful reminder that betrayal isn't something you can hide, no matter how hard you try to keep it together. "I'm sorry," I murmured, genuinely at a loss for what else to say. I had no idea." She gave a sad smile, shrugging as if she'd resigned herself to it. "Yeah, well, I guess it's just part of the life he leads. Everyone else seems to know. It's almost a joke in our family." Her bitterness was palpable, and it struck a chord with the bitterness I'd been feeling myself. In a strange way, it felt like I was looking into a mirror, seeing my own hurt reflected back at me. We fell silent for a moment, both of us lost in our thoughts. Finally, she broke the silence. "It's nice talking to someone who actually gets it," she said, giving me a faint smile. It's hard to find people who understand, who aren't just passing judgment." "Yeah," I nodded. "I get that." And I did. All the anger, the resentment, the feeling of being sidelined and betrayed by someone you thought you knew. It was all there, written plainly on her face. I could feel it echoing in me, too. As the night wore on, we drifted between topics, but the undertone of shared pain and understanding lingered. We both knew we were talking about more than just our spouses. Eventually, Belinda suggested we exchange numbers. "I don't know," she said, hesitating a little. "It's nice talking to someone who understands. Maybe we can catch up sometime, outside of all this." She gestured around at the crowded room. I agreed, slipping my phone from my pocket and adding her number. It felt like a quiet rebellion, something small and almost innocent but loaded with meaning. Part of me wondered if this was crossing a line, but another part, the part that was tired of feeling alone, didn't care. I wanted to talk to her again, wanted to be around someone who didn't judge, someone who got it. A few days later, we met up at this little cafe, off the beaten path, a cozy spot where no one would recognize us. At first, we kept it light, talking about everything and nothing, just grateful to be in the company of someone who understood without needing every detail spelled out. But eventually, the conversation turned serious again. We shared stories, venting the frustrations we'd been holding in for so long. Belinda talked about how Conrad's behavior had affected their family, the way he'd somehow made her feel small and insignificant. It was painfully familiar. At some point, she reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. It was a small gesture, but it felt like an anchor. In that moment, there was an unspoken understanding between us, a bond forged from shared pain. We weren't just two people comforting each other. We were two people trying to find something real in a sea of lies and betrayal. Later, when we finally said goodbye, there was a charged silence between us, an undeniable pull. I wanted to hold on to her, to reassure her, to feel that connection we'd shared again. But I knew we'd crossed into dangerous territory, and part of me wondered if this was just another layer of complexity I didn't need. Still, as I walked away, I knew that whatever this was, it was real, and it mattered. The plan started to form the night after my coffee with Belinda. Lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, I felt a mix of emotions tearing me apart. Relief, guilt, and this simmering anger that was finally bubbling over. I had spent months, maybe even years, feeling powerless, belittled, like I was somehow unworthy of respect from Kira or anyone else in my life. But my time with Belinda, sharing in each other's hurt and betrayal, had sparked something. For the first time, I felt like I could actually do something about all of it, like I could take control. I lay there thinking of all the times I'd bitten my tongue, all the silent resentment building up every time Kira brushed me off, lied to my face, or left me sitting at home wondering where she was. And now, with the full weight of her betrayal sitting on my chest, I knew I couldn't just keep it all inside anymore. The anger had to go somewhere, and, if I was being honest, a part of me wanted her to feel what I'd felt. I wanted her to know that I wasn't just some quiet, dependable guy she could walk all over. But I needed a plan. I wanted this to be more than just a confrontation. I wanted her to feel every ounce of regret for thinking she could treat me this way. And I wanted Conrad to understand that he wasn't as untouchable as he thought. So over the next few days, I started gathering everything I needed, every piece of evidence I could get my hands on. I went through Kira's messages, saved every suspicious text, and even managed to get my hands on a few photos from Trevor that showed her with that guy at the club. As I pieced it all together, I felt this cold determination settle in. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming my dignity, proving to myself that I could stand up for what I deserved. I was done being the guy who just took it. Once I had everything in place, I decided to set the stage. I'd bring Kira to a nice restaurant. Let her think it was just a casual evening out. The anticipation of what I had planned was almost thrilling. I wanted to see the look on her face, to watch her mask of indifference crack when I told her everything. When the night finally came, I played it cool, acting as if nothing was out of the ordinary. We sat across from each other, and I watched her talk about her day as if we were still living in some perfect little bubble. It was almost laughable how easily she could lie, like the past few months of deception were just business as usual for her. I made small talk, kept the conversation light, all the while feeling the tension building in the back of my mind. After a while, I leaned in, dropping my voice to make it clear that what I was about to say wasn't just casual dinner conversation. "Kira," I started, "there's something we need to talk about." She looked up, her face shifting into this fake concerned expression that almost made me want to laugh. "What is it?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "I know about him, Kira. I know everything. And, just so we're clear, I know about you sneaking around, the late nights, the excuses. I know about all of it." For a moment, she just stared at me, her face a mixture of shock and something close to fear. She opened her mouth to respond, but I wasn't done yet. I leaned back in my chair, letting the silence hang between us, making her sit in it. "And there's one more thing," I continued, letting the words sink in slowly. "I met up with Conrad's wife recently, with Belinda. Turns out, you and your little friend aren't the only ones who know how to keep secrets." The color drained from her face, and she looked like she'd been slapped. Her mouth opened and closed, searching for words, but she was completely speechless. It was satisfying, in a twisted way, watching her crumble, knowing that the control she'd held over me was slipping away. For the first time, I was the one holding the cards. After a long, tense pause, she finally stammered out, What are you talking about?" I didn't think." Her voice trailed off, and I could see her struggling to grasp the situation, realizing that her web of lies had completely unraveled. I didn't give her the satisfaction of an explanation. I just sat there, watching her flounder, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders as I saw her for what she truly was. And in that moment, I knew I was done. There was no coming back from this. The next day at work, I decided it was Conrad's turn. This wasn't just about Belinda or Kira. It was about showing Conrad that he wasn't invincible. I made sure to be in his line of sight all day, dropping subtle hints in our conversations. At first, he didn't catch on, but as I let Belinda's name slip into the conversation here and there, I could see the gears turning in his mind. Finally, during a meeting, I made a casual remark about our mutual friend. I could see the moment it clicked for him, the way his face froze, the dawning horror in his eyes. He knew that I had crossed a line he thought I'd never dare to cross. The satisfaction of watching him squirm, seeing the cool, cocky mask he always wore crack, was worth every ounce of anxiety I'd felt leading up to this moment. Conrad tried to regain his composure, tried to keep things professional, but it was too late. I could see the anger simmering beneath the surface, the realization that he wasn't the only one who could play dirty. In that moment, I felt like I'd finally taken back my dignity, that I'd broken free from the chains they'd both tried to wrap around me. For the first time in a long time, I walked out of that office with my head held high. After the night at the restaurant, it was like Kira had finally seen the full extent of the damage she'd done. For the first time, I saw her stripped of all her confidence, her defenses completely shattered. She didn't try to lie or make excuses anymore. Instead, she started calling me, texting me, leaving messages about making things work and trying again. But I was done. The betrayal was too deep, the trust shattered beyond repair. There was nothing left to salvage, and I told her as much. I wanted a divorce. There was no going back. At first, Kira couldn't believe it. She seemed convinced that I'd come around eventually, that we could sweep everything under the rug and pretend none of it had happened. But when I refused to engage, refused to let her sweet talk me into forgetting, her tone changed. The desperation crept in, followed by anger, and finally, the bitter reality settled in for her. This was happening, whether she liked it or not. We started discussing the terms of the divorce, which turned into a nightmare almost immediately. Every conversation felt like a battle. She threw out accusations, tried to twist things around, reminded me of our past and the good times we'd had, like she thought those memories would somehow make me forget all the lies. But I'd had enough of her manipulation. I could see her for who she truly was now, and there was no charm, no nostalgia that could change my mind. I wasn't interested in compromise. I was only interested in moving on, no matter how painful or drawn out the process would be. Hiring a lawyer was the next step. I needed someone on my side, someone who could handle the endless back and forth and deal with Kira's constant attempts to regain control. Every meeting was tense, the air thick with unspoken resentment and thinly veiled accusations. Kira knew exactly which buttons to press, bringing up moments from our marriage in a last-ditch effort to manipulate me. She'd bring up our shared memories, twisting them as if they were proof of something worth saving. "Don't you remember that trip to the lake?" she'd say, her voice laced with that familiar charm she used to get what she wanted. "We were so happy, Randall. You really want to throw all that away?" I'd just stare at her, seeing right through the act. "Kira, if you wanted to keep those memories intact, maybe you should have thought about that before you started sneaking around." The process dragged on longer than I'd expected, each new meeting more contentious than the last. The discussions turned into shouting matches, with both of us digging in our heels. It was exhausting, and I'd go home drained, feeling like I'd been put through the ringer, but my resolve never wavered. Kira had no more power over me. Her words were empty now, and the harder she tried to sway me, the more I realized just how free I was from her influence. During this chaotic time, Belinda became my anchor. What had started as a shared pain over our spouse's infidelities was turning into something more. She was there for me in a way no one else could be, offering not only comfort but understanding. We'd spend hours talking about everything, about the anger, the betrayal, and the strange freedom that came with finally letting go. She'd been through the same hell, and somehow, in the middle of all the chaos, we found a kind of peace together. Belinda was more than just an ally. She became the one person who could see me without the bitterness, the anger, or the resentment. With her, I felt seen for who I was, without the weight of my past mistakes or Kira's betrayals. Our connection deepened, and soon, the revenge that had initially driven us together was replaced by something genuine. She was there to help me keep perspective, reminding me of the future waiting beyond the divorce, beyond the bitterness and heartbreak. As we grew closer, my resolve to see the divorce through only strengthened. I wanted to move forward, to finally start living for myself instead of constantly cleaning up after Kira's lies. Belinda was the reminder that there was something better waiting for me on the other side, and I clung to that thought every time Kira tried to drag me back down with her. Then came the final meeting, the one that would end it all. We were in the conference room, both of us flanked by our lawyers, the atmosphere tense and quiet. Kira looked at me with a mixture of anger and desperation, like she still couldn't believe I was actually going through with this. I took a deep breath, knowing this was my last chance to say what I'd been holding back for so long. Kira, I started, my voice steady. I want you to understand something. For years, I believed in us, trusted you, thought we were building something real. I did everything I could to make things work, but I paused, letting the words hang in the air. You threw all of it away. You lied to my face, betrayed me in ways I can't even begin to forgive. And now here we are. This is the result of your choices, not mine. She opened her mouth to respond, but I wasn't finished. I don't want your excuses or your apologies. I don't need your explanations. This is over, and you need to understand that we're done. We're on different paths now, and I'm not looking back. The silence that followed was deafening. Kira just stared at me, her eyes wide, as if the finality of my words was finally sinking in. I saw the flash of realization cross her face, the understanding that there was no coming back from this. For the first time, she looked small, defeated, a shadow of the woman who had once thought she could walk all over me. I got up, nodded to my lawyer, and walked out of the room, feeling lighter than I had in years. The chapter with Kira was finally closed, and as I stepped outside, I felt the weight lift like I was shedding years of lies and heartache. I was ready for whatever came next, ready to finally live on my own terms. The first step after the divorce was to leave everything behind, physically, emotionally, mentally. I wanted a complete reset, far from the places haunted by memories of Kira and the person I used to be. So, I packed up and moved to a small, quiet house a few towns over. It wasn't grand or flashy, but it felt like mine. There was a calm to it, a sense of simplicity that I craved after all the turmoil. Here, I could start over without the ghosts of the past lurking around every corner. I threw myself into building a life that was just for me. I rediscovered hobbies I hadn't thought about in years, picked up an old guitar, started running again, even dusted off my fishing gear for a few quiet mornings by the lake. There was something meditative about getting back into these routines, about slowly piecing together a new version of myself, one that didn't revolve around anyone else's expectations or judgments. And as I focused on myself, changes started happening at work too. The fallout from Conrad's scandal had spread, and he was no longer the untouchable figure he once was. People whispered about his hypocrisy, the way he belittled me while hiding his own double life. The respect he'd once commanded had crumbled, and he was left trying to hold together the last threads of his reputation. Meanwhile, my own situation took a turn for the better. Colleagues who'd watched me go through it all began looking at me differently, not with pity, but with respect. They saw me as someone who had endured and come out stronger. In the midst of this shift, I was given the opportunity I'd been waiting for, a promotion that I knew I'd earned. For the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of professional pride and fulfillment. I had proven, not only to others but to myself, that I was capable and resilient. No one could take that from me now. Amid all this transformation, my relationship with Belinda evolved too. What had once been a bond built on shared pain was slowly growing into something genuine and stable. We weren't just supporting each other through rough patches anymore. We were building something new. Our conversations deepened. Our time together shifted from merely comforting each other to sharing real dreams and hopes for the future. With Belinda, it wasn't about filling the emptiness left by someone else. It was about discovering something that felt whole and true. One afternoon, while I was settling into my new place, I received a message from Kira. She wanted to meet. Part of me wanted to ignore her, to leave her in the past, but another part was curious, maybe even ready to hear what she had to say. We agreed to meet at a quiet cafe, somewhere neutral, where neither of us could fall back on the past. When she walked in, I barely recognized her. There was a nervousness in her eyes that hadn't been there before, a vulnerability I'd never seen. We exchanged awkward hellos, and for a moment, it felt like we were strangers meeting for the first time. She launched into a long explanation about her choices, her mistakes, trying to rationalize what she'd done. I listened, but it felt distant, as though I were watching it all unfold from outside myself. Kira tried to justify her actions, talking about the pressure she'd felt, the loneliness, even her own insecurities. But I'd heard enough. The anger and resentment I'd carried for so long had faded, replaced by a sense of closure. I could see now that this was more about her own issues than it ever was about me. Her words didn't cut like they used to. Instead, I felt a strange sense of peace, like I was finally letting go of all the bitterness and anger. When she finally fell silent, I took a deep breath and told her the truth. Kira, I'm done being angry. I've moved on. We've both made choices, and we have to live with them. I'm not here to dwell on the past or to make you feel guilty. This is just goodbye. She looked at me, her face a mix of confusion and sadness, and I knew she hadn't expected me to be so calm. Maybe she'd hoped for a fight or some kind of dramatic closure. But I wasn't the same man I'd been before. The chapter was closed, and I wasn't about to reopen it. After that meeting, I walked out of the cafe feeling lighter, like I'd finally shed the last remnants of that painful time. Kira was just a piece of my past now, and that's where she would stay. Later that evening, I met up with Belinda. We spent the evening quietly together, not needing to fill the silence with words. There was a warmth between us, a calm understanding that didn't need explanations or apologies. As we sat there, just enjoying each other's company, I realized that this was the life I'd fought for. A life free from lies, free from manipulation, filled only with the things I'd chosen to bring into it. This was my new beginning, my fresh start. And for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace.